Well, it's official. You can be a stingy penny pincher and still get 4K video. Stay tuned for the review next. So this review is tailored to those of you who want to know more about the video capabilities of the Panasonic Lumix DMC G7. I'm also going to do this review as a comparison, since the G7 is coming from the same stable as the awesome GH4 that we've been using and loving for the last 18 months. And seeing as how both cameras record 4K UHD resolution, of course you know the GH4 does shoot cinema 4K and the G7 does not do that. But still, it's logical though to consider the G7 as possibly an alternative to the GH4. Maybe though, if you don't need the additional features of the more expensive option, you would consider this, or possibly you would consider it as a second camera option. So how does it handle? What is the 4K image quality like? Since it's newer technology, does it have some advantages over the GH4? And actually, there's a bit of a surprise there that we'll get to later in the review. And of course, what are the disadvantages? Because obviously for the price, there's going to be some disadvantages. I will also talk in this review about the still image quality, although we're not going to go into that in depth. But before we get into it, keep in mind that these two cameras, the G7 and the GH4, are created for completely different types of users. And they're quite a bit different when it comes to the actual features that they have. So first of all, let's get into it by talking about the ergonomics and ease of use of the G7. First of all, Panasonic, they did a great job in general. If you've used any of the G-series cameras like the GX7, the GH3, GH4, you're going to be like very happy with the way the menus are. And also the dials are just obvious how they're used. Also, the grip on this camera is so good. I actually like it better than the grip or the way it feels in the hand than my GH4. It feels very secure. And I think part of that has to do with the lightweight of the camera, that it's so easy to grip. It's obviously lighter in weight because the G7 is built out of all plastic. It's only about 13 ounces, but it really doesn't put me off because actually the camera is built quite well. I wouldn't have any issues with it. As you know, there's no weather sealing like the GH4 has, so if it starts to rain, obviously you're gonna have to put it away. But there is something that's really big, and it's a really big to me it's a mistake in engineering, and that is the two selection dials on the grip side of the camera for changing the shutter speed and the aperture. They turn way too easy. It's super easy to unintentionally turn them out of position. They do have click stops, you know, but they just don't stop it enough. It's super easy to turn them, so that's kind of a bummer, really. You might be shooting something and accidentally move it and you wouldn't even notice. Another thing that I can compare with the GH4 is you don't get that video priority display like you do on the GH4. It makes it so much easier to make quick changes when you're in filming mode, when you're in cinema mode. So anyway, on the positive side though, the G7 has buttons all over it and they're customizable too. So you'll be able to change almost every setting you need while you're shooting without ever having to go into a menu. So in that regard, I would say it feels more like a professional camera really than a consumer camera. But as we're talking about professional features, there is something we don't get in the G7, and that is the shutter angle control of the GH4. We are stuck with the regular shutter speed control used by still cameras like DSLRs. The reason I like shutter angle control so much is that if you can set it at 180 degrees, you can leave it. Then when you change your frame rate, say from 24 to 48 or 60, it will automatically adjust the shutter speed for you because it's 180 degrees of whatever frame rate you happen to be using. So with the G7, not so. If you do change the frame rate, you have to remember to go and change the shutter speed. So that's not as convenient. For photography, that's great, but for video, it's so nice to have that setting. Also, I would like to include in the usability department a little complaint. My G7 came and I noticed that the LCD monitor on the back had kind of a magenta color cast to it, even though I knew I had nailed the white balance because I used a gray card. So I put it side by side with both of my GH4s to look at the same scene. It was mostly white, a white wall with some other things there. And I go, wow, it looks really magenta. So Then I took the footage, put it on my color corrected monitor so I could see, what was going on, and I noticed that the GH4 display is just more accurate out of the box. It looks the same as my color corrected monitor. So anyway, once I imported all the footage from this camera and the other two cameras, and I looked at the scene, they were all correct. So it is shooting the correct white balance, it's just you're not seeing the correct white balance. So I had to adjust that. And you can adjust the colors, they do have that capability on this camera. But just keep in mind that it's probably not calibrated quite as well as the higher line cameras. And here's something else that may drive you crazy at first. It's that the camera comes default with automatic LCD screen brightness enabled. And so it keeps the screen at the proper brightness, which is kind of nice. But the problem is the camera judges it through the lens. So if you have the lens cap on, you want to review your photos or videos, the screen's going to look ridiculously dark if you're outside and you have the cap on. You're gonna be like, why can't I see this? So anyway, I just turned that setting off. Okay, so we're done with the ergonomics. Let's talk about video. With the G7, you are limited to a total of 29 minutes of recording for each take. And you can't go over that, but let me tell you what a beautiful 29 minutes it is. Really, the G7 shoots beautiful footage in 4K. And happily, the video compression quality of the G7 is the same as the GH4 in 4K. It's 100 megabits per second. As soon as you switch though to 1080p, the compression is much higher on the G7 at only 28 megabits per second. And we know the GH4 stomps all over that with 200 megabits compression in the 1080p mode, right? It's all intra. So that is a big difference. If you're shooting to grade the footage afterwards, you probably will see a difference in your colors and in the highlight control and so on. Still, I was actually extremely happy with the 1080p video quality. Panasonic seems to be doing a great job with their imaging pipeline, their processing. So I was shooting MP4 format, 60 frames. I conformed it in post and got some really nice slow motion footage. So anyway, and Panasonic added a cool feature too, additionally, that I think is really, I'd actually like to see it be added to the GH4. It's called Snap Movie. And you go into that menu and you can do focus pull. It's actually a useful feature, and all you have to do to get there is go to the cam icon, Snap Movie, and it works by measuring and storing two focus distances. First you touch the focus, the camera measures the distance, then you touch the same point again, hold and drag to the second focus point, and let go. Your 2 points are now stored. Then all you have to do is push record, and the camera does the rest. It's a cool little electronic follow focus, like if you don't happen to have one with you. So I really liked it. Now, with micro Four Thirds cameras, one of the trade-offs that you deal with as compared to, say, a full-frame DSLR is noise, right? More of it, in other words. Of course, in my opinion, the advantages of using a micro Four Thirds camera outweigh the drawbacks to me for my workflow. It depends on you, what you want. But there is definitely a very cool, a very nice surprise with the Panasonic G7. And that is that they have improved the noise characteristics of the sensor at high ISOs. And I actually noticed while shooting, that it seemed better than my GH4. Then I did a test side by side with the exact same settings, camera profiles. In fact, I was shooting both cameras in the Cinelike V as in Victor, -3 saturation, -3 contrast. I think it was 0. I didn't do anything with sharpening or noise reduction. I left it at 0. So being purely subjective, I would say that the G7 gives you at least one stop better noise performance than the GH4 gives you. So that's awesome. I think that's really great. Of course, in low light conditions, you always have to try to expose on the high side in order to keep detail in the shadows. Since that H.264 codec that these cameras use gives priority to brighter parts of the image, and it has a tendency to toss out a lot of information in shadow areas. So that's just something to keep in mind. But yeah, something else I was wondering about when I was thinking about purchasing this camera was, what was the rolling shutter going to be like? How was there going to be a big problem with that? So I did do a few tests, and I can show you here that it is significantly more than the GH4. I mean, if you use the camera correctly, you're in good shape, but it is definitely more. Apparently the GH4 is reading out that CMOS sensor much faster than the G7 is, so probably still beats the A7S though in that department. So please don't try to film vertical telephone poles out of the side of your car window while you're flying down the freeway. It won't work out. They'll be kind of like this. Anyway, how's the battery life on this thing? It's kind of funny. The GH4 is famous for good battery life, but when I received the G7 and opened the package and I saw that little tiny square battery that came with it, I thought, uh-oh. But in reality, after using the camera for several days, all day long, I was actually pleasantly surprised with the battery life. For a consumer camera, it was pretty good. I shot mostly in 4K all day long, off and on, and obviously that drains the battery quicker than shooting in other modes. And still, I was able to use the camera all day long without really running out of battery. Obviously, I was recording intermittently. I was taking some photos, turning the camera on and off. Then I did a test later on to see, like, if I just pushed record, how much record time would I get. So in 29-minute increments, of course, I did get, I think, about an hour and 40 minutes or so of actual just press the button, record type of thing. So you may want to get an extra battery if you're using it at all for anything professional. One more beef. I think Panasonic should just delete the continuous autofocus in video mode from the firmware on the G7. It is just useless. The only time it even came close to working was in super bright light, and even then it was kind of like playing the lottery. You know, it's more about losing focus than getting focus. It's just not worth using, in my opinion. So delete that, Panasonic, from the firmware. Lastly, I would mention the still image quality of this camera. I can't say too much about it, but if you've used the GX7, I'd say it's about the same. You get nice quality images up to ISO 3200. Even a little beyond that, you can use them, definitely usable images. It seems like all of Panasonic's cameras, though, lately, the JPEGs are kind of softer than like Olympus cameras. So just shoot RAW and process your images properly, and you'll get great images out of this camera, as long as you don't crank up the ISO too high. And one great thing too that they included with this release was actually updated in the GH4 firmware also, is the 1/16,000th of a second shutter speed. The base ISO of this camera is 200, so it is nice to have that extra room if you're a still photographer, if you want to shoot like maybe with a wider aperture in full sun, etc. So it gives you that option. So overall, to my eye, the G7 gives you the same amount of dynamic range and pretty much video quality that you get from the GH4 shooting in 4K mode. Surprisingly, you get better low light performance. One whole stop, in my opinion. You saw what I shot. You get a lightweight but very capable piece of equipment. It's actually amazing what it does for what it costs. You can definitely turn out professional looking work if that's what you're after. So I could definitely recommend it for that. What you don't get is anamorphic capabilities. You don't get the variable frame rate up to 96 frames per second like the GH4. You don't actually get true Cinema 4K 24p either. You get a lesser build quality, plastic instead of magnesium alloy. You don't get weather sealing. Although you do have a microphone jack here on the side, and you have a mic levels control on the camera, you cannot monitor your audio with headphones, so you'll have to trust your eyes to make sure it's not peeking out on the back of the camera if you're going to record that way. You get decent battery life out of this camera, although obviously it's not nearly as good as the GH4 in that situation. You get beautiful 4K footage. It's stunning, actually. It's awesome. But you do have a limitation of recording 29 minutes for each take. The LCD monitor is, of course, excellent. It's super sharp, although it does seem to be a little bit off in the true representation of the color you're shooting. Even when you try to mess with it, it seems like I still couldn't quite get where I wanted to be. Rolling shutter is fairly prominent, although not quite as bad as a Sony a7S, I might add. It's unlikely that the G7 users will get the Vlog L that has been promised for the GH4. And by the way, Panasonic, if you're listening, please, can I say please one more time? Please give us Vlog. Well, anyways, we'll have to wait and see what happens if us GH4 owners will ever get Vlog, but probably we're not going to get it in the G7. That's just my opinion. Who knows? Maybe we will and we'll all be happy. Overall, I'd say at today's prices, $800 is actually a bargain for the quality of camera that you get, and especially for a consumer model. It does sport some impressive, even professional features. And of course, it's not just the camera that matters, is it? It's what you do with the camera. So go out there and shoot. Thanks for watching and have a good one. We'll see you next time. Don't forget to subscribe.